Hello and welcome to Rewind Reviews, a podcast that is unusually earlier for me than Chris for the first time in like a year. Only by an hour, because we're in the same hemisphere now. So for me it's like 7:30 a.m. and for poor Chris it's 8:30 a.m. It's not. No, it's. Oh wait, no. Have I got it the wrong way around?
Yep. Completely wrong. It's still earlier for me. It's 6:30 for me.
No. Because in my head I was like 7:30. There's no way it's earlier for Chris. He's not going to have gotten up at 6:30, is he? That'd be madness. And as I was speaking, I was doing the math, and I was going, so it's 7:30 for me, so it must be 8:30 for. No, that doesn't sound right at all. And then I realised.
Yeah, I was like, given that we've got to be done by 9:45, 9ish my time, well, 9:15 ideally, but yeah, you were, you did you say 8:30 and then go? That doesn't sound right.
Yeah,
that's 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Anyway, the movie we're watching this week is the classic action movie from the 90s, Die Hard on a Bus, as it was often jokingly known. We are, of course, reviewing Speed. Now, I chose this one, but I'm going to get this right off the bat. My history with this movie is very straightforward. I had it on VHS, one of my favourites. Just that simple. I don't know when I acquired it. I don't remember the first time I watched it, but it was just one of those ever-present, like Die Hard. I was a weird kid. I loved a good action movie, a good cheesy 90s action movie. And I mean, it's Speed. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's a classic, and it was just for some reason it was always in my young Dan rotation. I don't know. Do you have any sort of history with the film beyond the same? Because I got to assume you've got a similar love for it for that reason.
Yeah, no, very similar to you. Watched it at a young age. Really enjoyed it. I don't think I didn't have it on VHS. I think it's maybe one that rented on VHS a few times. But I've seen it a bunch. Like I think it's one where I last watched it. Like I know I've watched it at least twice in this house. I know I've watched it. I watched it probably around uni aged. I watched it when I was younger for the first time. So yeah, I think. Sorry, excuse me. God, can't believe I'm tired when Dan's an hour behind.
Oh, you got there before me. I was just about to say, God, Chris, it's earlier for me than you. I don't know why you're yawning. You got there first. And it's funny. I've never watched it with a critical eye.
Neither have I. I was watching it last night, and it's so familiar to me because I think, like you, I've seen it a bunch of times, and I was just watching it with a critical eye, going, "This movie's fucking brilliant." Yeah, not to spoil, but I definitely recommend. It's very, very well put together.
Yeah, I think for overall thoughts, we'll just get this straight out of the way. It's a recommend. So before we start going into the nitty-gritty, if you've never seen Speed and you're listening to this thinking maybe this was going to be us like sort of slating it, it was going to be fun and you weren't going to have to watch the movie, I would suggest you do before you listen to this review if you happen to be one of the people that hasn't ever seen Speed. And it's really interesting. What's happened with this podcast is because we are, I would say, about 10 years older than our average listener. This is what I have discovered. We did Spotify gave me a bunch of stats this week as a part of like a Spotify Wrapped for podcasting, and our average listener is roughly 10 years younger than us. It's not 100% true. Funnily enough, only like 5% of our listeners are actually in our age bracket. It's really it's a small number. And I think what's happened is we did Steven University and we did Analysing Avatar, and for whatever reason, those two podcasts attracted an audience not in our age demographic, and that audience has followed us to Rewind Reviews, and it's not 100% truthful. So because I noticed, there's a few percentage of people that are listening who are like in their 60s, which is delightful, and thank you to those of you who are in those other age brackets. But that is the primarily what it is. And I do notice sometimes, like, we'll do a movie like Speed, where I'm like, well, everyone will have seen this, and we'll get comments or like emails that are like, I'd never seen that movie. So if you are in the demographic that's literally never seen the movie Speed, and I'm saying it in that tone because for people our age that sounds insane, you 100% should. It's brilliant. It is as close to a sort of action masterpiece as you can get. I do think it has some third act problems, which we'll talk about. But they're I would say they do not. They come close to maybe causing more of an issue than they do, but they just get away with it. But we'll talk about those. But on the whole, this should definitely be watched before you know everything that's going to happen in it. Because I would argue, actually, this movie's rewatchability is somewhat hurt by knowing the outcome of every major set piece, because the outcomes are quite iconic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there is. It is funny. Like I was watching it thinking, I can't really judge how well. I think they do tension brilliantly.
Yeah.
But I'm so familiar with the movie that it's slightly hard to judge.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the movie's got a very iconic structure, and I will say one of the biggest things I love about this, and it often gets, and I'll clarify this right up top as well. So yeah, we're saying recommend, go watch it if you haven't already. We're going to start spoiling the movie a little bit now. Because we'll just get straight into this one. I don't think there's any reason to dance around this one. We both enjoyed it, so I think we'll dive in. But I think the Die Hard comparisons, they're understandable, but I don't think fair, because I think the movies derive their tension from two different places. I think the action in this is less combat orientated and more situational, and I think it does a good job of being like quite. And I know it's called Speed, so this is going to sound like I'm making a bad joke, but it is very fast paced, but not in the way that I think people are thinking. It's unique set pieces, but no set piece outstays its welcome. The problem arises, the solution, it escalates, the solution comes, we move on, and that happens 8 times. So there's the lift sequence, there's the initial catch the bus sequence, there's the standoff with the gun on the bus, there's the obstacles in the city, then there's the big turn. You've got to do a big turn. It's a sharp turn. You've got to keep over 50 on a sharp turn. Then there's the gap. Then there's him going under the bus to try and defuse the bomb. And then there's the getting off the bus, set piece. And then there's the catch the bad guy set piece. It's like 9 set pieces, which in a 2-hour movie doesn't, it's not long per set piece if you're actually dividing it up that way. But each one it's got its own unique situational problem to resolve. Sometimes it's a problem that's left over from a previous set piece. The bus is damaged in some way or whatever. But it flows really neatly. And I think the character work is fairly thin, and I do think there's some third act issues, but it does blast by, because it is just every time there's a problem, once they resolve it, it's straight on to the next one. And that is just a very different kind of movie to what Die Hard is, because the problems are situational and practical, not I've got to shoot the bad guy. And even the scenes where there's a bad guy to shoot, it doesn't end up coming down to a gunfight. It ends up being a problem-solving exercise, almost always. And I think that's really clever, and it really does actually make it feel completely different to Die Hard. So while I understand the joke from the time, Die Hard on a blank, I don't think it's fair at all. I think it's probably the least fair thing you can say about this movie.
I also think it's funny, because I think people forget how much of the movie isn't actually set on the bus,
right?
Which I know sounds stupid, but it is. Die Hard, the entire movie is the tower, and that it's quite bottle in that regard. Actually, Speed, it has a beginning portion with the lift sequence and an end portion with the subway and all that stuff that are just completely separate. And and I think also it's more of it's obviously way more of a two-hander, three-hander if you count the villain, but in terms of good guys, it's way more of a two-hander than Die Hard is. And I think Die Hard's also, like you said, you referenced a lot of shooting and stuff. I think Die Hard's actually a bit more aggressive and violent than this film.
Oh yeah,
they go out of their way in this film to not kill too many people. They make it clear that there was only the driver on the first bus that gets blown up. They show the guy running away when the second bus crashes into the plane. Sorry, this is spoilers. But yeah, like Dan said, we're going right into it. They show the driver of the truck thing running away when it crashes into the plane. There is quite a gruesome death. The woman who ends up under the bus. But otherwise,
that's to create that is deliberately used to create tension because they know you'll feel that because death has been taken seriously in the rest of the movie. The reason that death feels so much impact is because the movie has not given you a lot of that yet. And when someone does go, especially not that long after the sort of more comedic close call with the guy whose car he steals, and then he jumps off the car into the bus. And then the car runs off the freeway into those like water canister things, and like that's a moment where maybe in a Die Hard movie, that car hits a wall and explodes, and that guy died to to save those on the bus or whatever. And I say a Die Hard movie, I mean a later Die Hard movie. Probably, I don't think that character would have even died in one of the first Die Hard movies. But like, so the reason you feel the tension and that death hits so hard that the older lady, when she tries to get off later, is because they're very sparing with the murder in the movie.
Yeah, because also I think and this is key because there is also, I just realised the security worker at the beginning, and obviously Harry and his entire team. But actually, I think what it is only the good guy is only responsible for one death, and that's the villain. And every other person that dies is at the hands of the villain. Whereas, John McCain is killing multiple villains, all over the place. And I think, and that's not a criticism, I've gone on record many a time. I think Die Hard is a perfect movie. I'm not criticizing Die Hard to praise Speed. I'm just saying that I agree with you. I think one other distinction between the two is the way in which death and violence is treated.
Yeah, 100% agree. I 100% agree. So yeah, and I think again, just like making each thing be more of a situational. How do we solve this problem rather than how do we shoot this guy? Just makes it very different in terms of its like scene to scene tension and action. It's a very different kind of action movie. So yeah, that's why I don't think those comparisons are very fair. Although Die Hard will come up again because of like how this movie came about. We'll talk about that later. But let's get straight into my biggest my biggest initial thought, Chris, is for a movie called Speed. The fact that there are three entire minutes at the beginning of this movie just slowly moving down an elevator shaft while names show up.
It was insane. Like, we had it last week as well with Stop or My Mum Will Shoot, where it felt like that kind of old school, most of the credits are at the beginning, but this was fucking tedious.
I don't even think tedious is the word. And look, and I get it. Like, so in the modern day, when you watch a movie, but for listeners who are maybe part of that younger demographic I talked about earlier, when you watch a movie in the modern day, and there's two sort of sections to the credits. There's the more colourful ones with like, I don't know, some sort of relevant imagery from the movie, or like just something more interesting, and then it goes to that fades out after 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then you get the really sort of strict legal black and white credits that are there because, everyone's lawyers made sure they got a credit in a certain way, and that's why those ones are there. In the old days, those two things used to be very separate. One would be shoved at the front of the movie, and one would be and the black and white one would be what was reserved for the ending. So that's just how it was done back then. But I'm sorry. Doing the credits to a movie called Speed by taking 3 minutes to just pan down an elevator shaft slowly. And the shot is impressive. Apparently they used a miniature for that, which is really cool. I love use of miniatures. The director of this movie loves miniatures. I'm on his side. It doesn't set a good tone. It's not the start of this. It's not the rip-roaring start this movie actually needed. I think we should. I mean, and that was just how things were done back then. But Christ, I mean, look to the credit of "Stop, My Mom Will Shoot," which is a sentence I didn't think I'd say today. At least theirs is mercifully short, comparatively.
Yeah, that's true. But otherwise, once that's gone, we really we should say, and I feel like, so for those that don't know, just a quick, but Keanu Reeves plays a cop. that attends someone who has set up a bomb in an elevator. And that they rescue the people within the elevator, and they manage to save the day. They rescue 13 people, but the bomber survives, and the bomber, as revenge, gets the cop involved, gets the cops, but mainly Keanu Reeves' character, because the other cop got shot in the leg and therefore is sort of office bound. Gets him involved in a case where he has put a bomb on a bus, and the bus can't go. The minute the bus goes over 50, it can't then go below 50, or it will blow up. So he gets involved with trying to save the bus and save the passengers, which he then does. So the bomber kidnaps Annie, who he's sort of been bonding with throughout the movie on the bus. So kidnaps Annie, but then after a fight on a subway train, the Keanu Reeves' cop, whose name is escaping, John? I think it's John.
Jack, I think.
Jack, yeah, it's Jack. Jack manages to kill the bomber, and him and Annie jump the train tracks and end up safe and well, and together romantically until Speed 2 Cruise Control. Which I've not seen, but yeah, I know that they're no longer together.
I've seen Speed 2 Cruise Control a couple of times. Not looking forward to covering it on here, is what I will say.
Yeah. So yeah, that elevator scene is, kicks off right away, and it is very much the movie, with the exception probably of a bit of a minor scene where the police get their medals. It is fundamentally like 3 set pieces in a row, and it just makes it feel like it has, once you get the credits out of the way, like it has a real pace and a real piff about it. You were saying earlier that the structure of the movie is quite iconic. Do you want to? Because I got similar thoughts, but just that phrasing suggests you got very kind of specific thoughts about it. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, I just think it is such a perfect example of the 3-act structure, I think, because you have your setup of the situation, followed by just an increasing escalation through the second act through to sort of lowest point, and then the third act is your characters sort of resolving that situation and sort of coming back to where they started with, but having changed. I think having changed is. Character work is not really this movie's goal. I do think the movie would lose it. So here's my dilemma as a person who's a nerd for screenwriting, right? Watching a movie like this, and other reviewers who maybe are more into filmmaking might not have this necessarily as an overall problem, but I really do feel like the way to make me care about what's going on in a movie is to make me like the characters, right? And invest me in their journey. This movie doesn't really do a great job of that, in my opinion. I'm invested in the situation, not necessarily the characters. I think the characters are all razor thin. But what I have to acknowledge is that to do the other thing, we would have to take from the thing I'm mostly going to compliment this movie for, which is its pace. So I'm very torn about this as a criticism, because I'm sort of looking at it going, it should be doing something more with the characters. None of them really change across the entire movie. No one really has an arc. They're all pretty much end where they started.
Yeah, but I think there is a world where you could squeeze that in without affecting the pace too much. So, for example, Jack, you could have them in their conversations, in the lift, rather than maybe the shoot the hostage stuff. You could have Harry talk to Jack about, you just need to find someone, you're lonely, and he's like, I'm not lonely, But then at the medal ceremony, we see maybe Harry's got some family there, and we see Jack look over, and he hasn't got anyone, and then by the end of the film, he's got Annie, and you could have, rather than Annie starting as this lovely, like friendly, bubbly woman, she could maybe get on the bus and acknowledge the driver, but actually be quite shy and retiring. And then through this, she has to step up and save the day. And suddenly, you know, instead of the jokes of like, I don't drive because of my speeding, it's a little less of that, and it's more her confidence growing. And then by the end of the movie, he's learnt to accept someone in, and she's got her confidence.
Yeah, and I guess the argument would be like, well, what does that? I mean, you are invested in the situation so well anyway. Does it need that? But this is what this is my dilemma.
I don't think it does need it. I'm just saying you could. I think there's a world where you could do it without taking away too much from the pacing.
I don't disagree with you. I think this is why this movie confounds me somewhat, because I think on paper it shouldn't function the way it does. And I guess this is one of those things where it's an exception, not the rule. Because I think any other movie tries to do what this movie does, where the characters don't really grow or change in any major notable way. There are literally almost no character arcs.
And they really aren't thinking about it, but it's still so engaging.
Exactly,
and even because basically, and the reason we're saying fundamentally, the reason we're saying there's no character arcs is because every character, you know, with the exception of those that have died, every character is basically in the same position at the end of the movie, you know, personality growth wise, as they were at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, right. You know, because nothing.
Annie's been through some shit, but
nothing challenges the. So at the beginning of the movie, you get what might be the start of a potential character arc with Jack Traven, whatever his name is. It says I think it says Traven on IMDb, but I'm sure it's Taven, and someone's just mistyped that. But I'll double check that later. But Jack has this moment in the bar with Jeff Daniels, where what's Jeff Daniels' character called? Harry, and I think ultimately what it's doing is showing us how easy it would be for a good cop to turn into our villain, because Harry is cynical. Harry is like, lives are on the line, we don't get paid enough. It's silly, like this situation we're in. You know, we get old and we get a cheap watch, which is obviously a little set up for a plot point later in the movie, but also it's showing us the very distinct difference between young Jack, who's all action hero, save the girl, like that kind of guy, you know, and not worried about, because he's almost rising above it right now. But then you see Harry, who's older, and you go, oh, this is the route they all go on. This is kind of what the movie is saying. Like, Jack will eventually become Harry, and if pushed too far, could become our villain, right? They're all capable of becoming Dennis Hopper's character. And I liked that, and I thought, are we going to show Jack slip into some of that cynicism in the middle of the movie but overcome it? You know, I thought maybe that's where that was going, but it turns out it was just making a point about, it was just sort of laying the groundwork for believability for our villain's motivations. And for those who don't remember, the villain in this movie used to be a police officer like Jack and Harry, but when he retired, he realized he'd been paid minimum wage and got a crappy watch as a retirement gift, and like he'd saved all these lives and done all these good things, but never been appreciated for it by society. And the reason he's, you know, doing these bomb threats is to get money, because it's money he thinks he's owed. He thinks he's deserved for his life of service, for giving his life to this service. And again, I thought they were going to do something interesting with that. And I think that when I was watching the movie, I thought, oh, this is the start of like a character arc where maybe we'll see Jack wrestle with becoming a bit more cynical, but rise above it ultimately. You know, that's sort of a character arc. It's not a clean person starts in A believing one thing and then returns to at the end of the movie having changed. It's more of a, they nearly succumb to the dark side, so to speak, and then refuse that because they rise above it. And that's also a form of a character arc. It's a very different kind of character arc, but it still functions.
Yeah,
but we don't do that.
There's also just as thin him going from an attitude of shoot the hostage to staying with the hostage and potentially dying.
But
with
the movie forces that upon him mostly. I agree. The very last moment is to choose to stay with the hostage, but the moment where he doesn't choose to shoot her earlier on is because obviously she's covered in C4 and that wouldn't help. And like,
oh yeah, I'm not talking about that. Yeah, I'm talking about very specific, like her.
But the very end. But the very end is more just about he's fallen in love, is it not?
Well, I think but this is why I think the character arc stuff is so clever in this movie in its thinness, because whilst you can make an argument they do what I've just said about shoot to save, whilst you can make an argument he resists the dark side and stuff like that. Actually, what's really clever is the movie doesn't put a pin on any of this and go and try and state that these things were there when they perhaps are a bit thin or weren't. And I want to specifically use the fallen in love element of it, because there are so many movies where they go through something like this and at the end they literally do say I love you or whatever to each other. In this movie, it's so clever to me that the whole thing is, in two moments, the whole thing is this sort of jokey, relationships that start after trauma have a tendency to burn out. And even at the end, where they're like, well, let's just make it about sex. Like, you get the vibe that they're if it weren't for the sequel, that they're potentially going to be together. And you certainly get the vibe that they want to sleep with each other by the end of the movie. But they're not trying. The movie does not try and make it this grandiose love story. They don't say I love you. They don't indicate they're going to be together forever. It's literally like, fucking hell, that was a tough day, let's go have some sex. Like, and I just think that's
or at the very least, maybe we'll do a date. Maybe at some point we'll have a date.
I genuinely think that's really clever, because you don't end the movie going, oh, come on, I know they've been through a lot, but you're not fucking in love yet, are you? That's mad. Like, and they just make it about, like I say, fucking hell, that was a wild ride. Let's let's go on a date, let's whatever. And I just think whilst you can make arguments that they've done all the things you and I have just talked about, the fact that the movie doesn't try and make any of those things grander than they are is really fucking clever, I think, because we're not sat here. We're sat here talking, literally you used a sentence. And like you say, the movie's a bit of a marvel for it, but I think that's one of the reasons why. You literally used the sentence, this movie has no character arcs, and we are not talking about it as a criticism. Yeah, like, we are not. Leveling that.
And I don't understand. I mean, I guess it's more that it's not that the character arcs are thin. It's that they've just chosen not to do it to push the movie through faster and like make that pace, and that's not the only reason they're doing it. Obviously, there's just a deliberate choice there to keep these characters that way, and we focus on the tension and the building of the action. But it is noteworthy because, again, on paper, this shouldn't work. Like, there's a reason they never showed us, Chris or I, this movie when we were in learning screenwriting courses at uni. Like, because I think anyone trying to analyze this movie would be like, wait a minute. How does this work? But speaking of the writing,
it is.
Oh, God, sir.
Yeah. Well, it's I was potentially the same subject, but a different thing, because it is a masterclass in how to build action and how to create suspense and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I don't really I struggle to explain how that works either, because I will be honest, this was not a genre I was particularly adept at writing when I was, as much as when I was studying screenwriting and when I've done writing since. This isn't exactly my genre, so the magic of creating this kind of very specific kind of tension sometimes eludes my understanding or explanation, because it's I guess the closest I can come to explaining why this movie works so well on that front is very clear, laid out situational stakes that feel natural and believable in the circumstances that would be a problem. And like understanding, but the setup of this movie is so genius. There's a bus that cannot slow below 50 miles an hour or it will explode. And you go, well, what do you do with that? Well, the answer is what happens when they get to traffic? What happens when there's a really tight turn? What happens when there's a bit of the road missing? Like, which is actually, I'll be honest with you, the bit of the road missing one is my least favorite. Sorry to say, and I'll tell you, I have a theory on why that one doesn't work, and it's because it was not conceived by the screenwriter. So that section was added after the screenwriter had sort of finished the project, and the director, the guy ultimately ended up directing it, Jan de Bont, was driving around LA, saw an unfinished road. Ironically, the road they would end up shooting much of this movie on because it wasn't. We'll come to that later. But he saw a gap in a road, in a freeway, and he went, oh, that would be a good thing. But that one's the least interesting one to me because and I'll tell you, I think this really might be helping me understand where the tension's coming from. There's nothing they can do to solve that problem other than just go fast and hope. Whereas all the other ones require quick thinking and reactions to make them. So when they're coming up across the right turn, the really hard right turn, and usually to make a turn that sharp, you would slow to almost a halt and then go around it. They cannot do that. And generally speaking, if you hit a turn that you're supposed to too fast, you're just going to go off. You're just going to crash. Or, in this case, because it's a top-heavy bus, or a big old bus, the fear is that it might topple over. And the way they resolve that is actually really clever. Jack makes everyone stand on the other side of the bus, put the weight all on one side, and then as they do it, you understand the physics and the stakes of, like, if this goes over, this happens. If they go too fast, this happens. It's
I think that's the physics is the problem with the with the missing road as well. I think there's actually for such a audacious idea, a lot of it is grounded in realism. What you're describing there, the problem solving aspect of it is grounded in realism, whereas the missing road one, you're like, are they making that jump? That feels a bit ambitious,
and it feels like they make the jump just because the movie wants them to, not because they did anything to solve the problem.
Yeah, and it also, and admittedly, the one at the end has a bit more. He's going faster to essentially jump to make the subway cart jump the track. But when he says like, "Oh, this track isn't finished," you are a bit like, "Fucking come on." Come on, LA! Finish your roads and your rail tracks.
No, but even worse than that, Chris. They were passengers boarding that train. Where was it going?
Yeah.
That was it's not like they stole a train car that was actually like, had like trucks and like wood and lumber on it, like on like pallets. It wasn't like, you know what I mean? It wasn't like a construction train that was going to the site to bring materials. This was a commercial train being driven by, hilariously driven by Toby Ziegler. It's 2 movies in a row, Toby. I hope you make it into the first X-Men movie.
I did wonder if that was
Richard Schiff,
him.
Yeah,
but I was like, but obviously it's so quick, and I started doing the maths, and I started being like, no, I don't think it would be, because surely he'd be bigger. But no, that's amazing.
It's Richard Schiff. But like, that's a commercial train with people just boarding it. Where's it going? Where's this?
Yeah, because I did mean to. I did mean to rewatch to see if there was a shot of it like switching tracks or something like that, or something to indicate it had deviated off course, but I didn't see that.
Yeah, I didn't either. I looked. Oh, and I'm not trying to. This is why I did say I had some third act problems. I guess we're sort of reaching my complaints about the third act. Some of this stuff in the third act feels a little forced. For example, can you slow the train down? No. Can you stop the train? No, the controls are broke. Okay. Can you speed it up? Yes, that still works conveniently for the needs of this movie. Cool, you have that function, huh? He literally says, nothing works, like the panel is dead, I can't do anything with it. And then 3 minutes later, he's like, hey, well, wait a minute, there's a turn coming up. If I speed the train up, I'm like, you didn't have any control 30 seconds ago. So you do have control.
It's also the way they have fights and pass that detonator around and it somehow doesn't blow up.
There's that too.
That's fucking mad.
So I'm so okay. So third act. Let me just very quickly cover this stuff because I don't want to make too much of a point of this. I don't want this to become like the review where Dan said he liked the movie, but he had this really huge problem. The third act does kind of it comes close to falling apart. Is what I'll say. Two reasons. Ultimately, while I think the problem solving of the cameras is cool, the tension of the final bus, the conclusion to the bus of it all, is pretty fucking lame duck, in my opinion. There's no tension because the bad guy is just convincingly tricked. We never cut back to him studying the footage like he thinks something might be wrong at all. Like, we never indicate he might be looking at it. We never cut back to him looking at the footage. It's just, okay, we've successfully tapped into his feed. We'll just get everyone off the bus. Okay. They climb over they'll climb over the pallet. They'll climb over the wooden plank. They'll get onto the other bus, and then everyone's off. And then the solution to how the last two get off, once that is no longer an option, is fine, but not. It doesn't have the tension. It has a bit of like soaring, like, hey, they did it, they slid off, and it's kind of a cool visual. But just none of that has the tension or threat of imminent death that it should have for the finale. And it felt like the filmmakers knew that was a bit of a lame duck conclusion to the bus stuff. So then they have it crash into a plane.
Yeah, because the explosion is so insanely big.
And I get it. There's a line earlier in the movie when he's he's under the bus and he's like, oh fuck, and the guy goes, oh darn, that funny moment. Thanks, Joss Whedon. We'll talk about that in a minute. That moment, he very much says there's enough C4 to blow a crater in the earth. Like, it's supposed to be a huge explosion. And I guess, up the ante, let's deliver on that and have it blow up a plane. Hands up, cool. Like, I'm not going to complain about that. But it almost feels like after I think, fairly lame conclusion, it's like they knew how to escalate and then didn't know how to satisfactorily end it. They didn't really have a good, satisfying conclusion to that situation, in my opinion, other than just, well, we'll play the footage, we'll get everyone off, and then those two will slide out under it and it'll just blow. Like, I don't know. It didn't feel very action-packed. It didn't feel very suspenseful. There's never really much tension to it. I never felt anyone was in danger in that final sequence. Once the footage is playing, it's just like, okay, now everyone gets off. And admittedly, Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves get off in a more interesting way visually, but I never felt tension during any of that, which is a shame because the rest of the movie is so good at developing tension. So yeah, that's a big problem.
That was less of an issue for me personally. I thought the tension of how they were going to get off, and them getting off was fine and served that purpose. But actually, thinking about it, they had already embedded the mechanism to add the tension that you wanted from that scene, which is the gasoline. Just keep cutting to the gasoline counter going down and the gasoline gushing out of the out of the truck as well,
and the speedo going down towards 50.
Yeah. Just keep cutting on all of those things and make the tension.
Yeah.
Is the bus going to go less than 50 miles an hour
before they get
during
off
the course of this rescue?
Yeah.
You would have to thinking about it then show a shot of the gasoline no longer leaking, because thinking about it, actually, there should not only be that huge explosion, there should then also be a line of fire covering this gasoline that's spilt everywhere.
Yeah, so that part doesn't. And then also, I mean, I must admit, I don't love the final sequence, if I'm being honest. The movie feels like it artificially... I think it doesn't feel very natural to the script, the subway sequence. It feels like... Even before I got to researching the movie and discovered how the subway sequence ended up existing, which is it wasn't part of the original script, but even before I knew that, I'd written notes about how it didn't feel like a natural thing to it. It feels cheaper. It feels like it's got more holes in it. It's been less thought out. Like, you know, even something is down to like, conveniently the train won't slow down or stop, but it can go faster. You know, why were people on the train if it's going to a dead end? You know, like all those sort of like weird logic holes. Oh, there's a point when Jack like finds a locked door and he just shoots through it, and then when he opens it, it's like into the train like station, and there were loads of people running by that could have been clipped by one of his bullets, and I was just like, you know. That's why we don't just shoot through doors, Jack. You know what I mean? Like, that was very dangerous for those people that just passed.
Yeah, it's definitely the clean. It's the weakest of the three acts. I would say.
And also the fucking money, right? They go like, he hasn't collected it yet. It's still there. Maybe we should turn the tracker on. The tracker wasn't already on. You're turning it on now.
More than that. I'm sorry. The guy dropping off the money fucking takes off the lid and has a good old look. Like, I want to know why he didn't fucking notice
the hole.
There was a big old hole in the ground.
Yeah, and look, and a lot of this might sound like nitpicking. Maybe we've sort of walked halfway. Maybe this podcast is happening on a stroll, and we've sort of walked in the vicinity of Nitpick Corner. Maybe we've not landed at Nitpick Corner, but we can see it. It's the next street over. For some of this stuff, for sure. But when the rest of the movie is so tightly written and well conceived and believable, with the exception of the bus jump, all of the other set pieces feel so grounded and so within the rules of the film and so well thought out that the ending stands out for not feeling any of that, in my opinion.
Yeah, although I'll take us there, Dan. I'll take if you're willing to. Let's walk the few steps to Nitpick Corner if you fancy it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're so close. We might as well.
Why? If you're not going to do anything with the notion that the bus might have a puncture, why show the bus going over those spikes as it enters LAX
they do.
And it getting a puncture?
I had the same note until I realised that that's the thing that breaks at the end. It's the puncture that causes the bus to suddenly start losing speed and stops them from being able to get it. The bus jumps, and that's what breaks the wooden plank that they've been crossing over. The puncture is why Sandy B, what is it? Jack and Annie. Thank you. Yeah, I don't want to keep calling them their actor names. Jack and Annie. That's the reason they have to get off. So they do use it. That bothered me at first because it was so long from when they used it. I'd already written a note that was like, "What happened to this puncture?"
I'll change my nitpick then. How fucking long does that bus survive with a puncture?
Sorry, I lost you for a second there. What was that? How long does the bus survive with what? Sorry,
with a puncture.
Yes,
I'm going to change my nitpick to. So that bus is going a long time with that massive puncture.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know, man. Yeah, I've got the shot where it goes over that, and it only shows like one random tire getting punctured, but surely all of the tires went through the same grid thing. They should all be punctured, and they're not. There's just one.
That whole thing, I think that whole entrance would have been, because also you can't quite convince me. Like, they should have seen him. They should have got. It should have been. Why is he turning off? Oh, he's going to LAX. Cool him. Like, the notion that the guards couldn't then... Do you know what I mean? If you're going to make it so that they don't know they're coming and they have to bust through the gates and all that shit, then they need to do a little more, or we need to see a scene of the police going, whoa, they're with us, stop, or something. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
So when grey suit guy, the really annoying guy, tourist guy, he's the last passenger to get off. As he's crossing the plank, they cut to a shot of that tire. I've just double checked to make sure I'm not crazy. They cut to a shot while he's halfway across the plank of that tire, and then it suddenly sort of bursts. It was like the tire had been damaged, but it hadn't quite punctured yet. And then you see it sort of like burst. There's a puff of smoke out of it. Then the bus veers off. The plank falls down. He's still on it. And then we cut back to the tire, and it's now clearly going flat. But again, I don't know why the other tires weren't damaged. And I don't know why that bus with the plank doesn't just drive back to them to get Annie and Jack off. There's no reason. It doesn't just come back. And I will say, if we're doing like logic, can we be in nitpick corner for just another second, and then we'll move on to we'll complimenting the movie, because it's a very good movie. Most of this stuff doesn't matter. It's why we're at nitpick corner, and why we were nitpick corner adjacent when I was coming to my third act problems, because some of them are just little logic issues. It just doesn't feel as smooth. But this one does genuinely bother me every time I watch it. Through a lot of this movie, the bus is clearly not going 50 miles an hour. Like I'm willing to suspend my disbelief, but like the worst offender is when they're coming off the freeway and they go off the road, and they're hitting all the signs, each of which would be causing resistance and slowing it down. It is clearly going at like 20 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour, if that. Like buses like that, you really have to make them weigh very little and have a really clear road to reach those kinds of speeds, because they're heavy and then, generally speaking, not massively powerful, because they're not designed to be. They're city buses. They're supposed to totter around a city. Like they're not not designed for speed, Chris. They're not aerodynamic, big flat heavy things.
The trouble is, 40 miles an hour is actually the realistic target for this situation in this movie, but it just doesn't sound as cool.
No,
the bus can't go
right.
below 40 miles an hour. But that's
Sure.
the reality.
Yeah.
40 miles an hour is way more realistic for this situation.
It is, and also I would say, but even I will say, even then, if it was 40 miles an hour, I'd believe every moment except for the moment where they're off road on the freeway going around being hit by this, because it's clearly going at about 20 miles an hour during that moment. Like, I'm like, they're dead every time. So yeah, that's nitpick corner anyway, unless you've got any other nitpicks you want to throw in while we're doing it.
No.
All right,
No.
let's leave. Let's get to Joss Whedon's contributions, because I think this is interesting to me. For those who don't know, he's not credited as a writer on the movie, but he did rework all the dialogue. And I made note of all the Joss Whedonisms. I think in the elevator sequence, Bob, what button did you push? Is Joss Whedon, and obviously Joss Whedon. The bit where they're expecting the lift to fall down, but it doesn't, and the guy says, "Usually they fall down now." That's Joss Whedon. When the guy looks out the window and sees Jack chasing them and goes, "Man sure has a hard on for the bus." Joss Whedon. The whole when he's translating for Jack, or repeating for Jack, and Jack says "fuck me," and he goes, "Oh darn," that's Joss Whedon. The airport, I've already seen the airport. Joss Whedon. Okay, Jack, this is it. Don't get dead. Joss Whedon. Only two more. Don't worry. The line about making things more complicated. I didn't write the exact line now. I was supposed to go back and fix that. There's a line where someone's like, "Well, that makes things more complicated." Very Joss Whedon. And then the final one, and it's probably the worst offender because it's in the third act, so of course it is. It's when Jack beheads the villain, and his reply is, "Well, I'm taller."
Yeah, doesn't even really make sense.
Well, he's taller. He's taller now because the guy lost his head. You see, Chris. So the guy's shorter.
Oh, right. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's a reference to the fact the guy just got beheaded.
Yeah. I thought it was because it comes across as like that's why he was able to do that. And I was like, but okay, yeah. No, it does make sense.
Okay, I'm sorry, Chris. We're about to turn back. I've got one more tiny nitpicky complaint very quickly. And it's just something me and you bring up all the time, and this movie commits a cardinal sin really early on, and we've got to cover it very quickly. I don't want to do it later when we're being more positive about the movie. I'm happy to have a little section of nitpicks in the middle, but we should get to positivity again because it is a really good film. There's a point in the movie, in the elevator sequence, when Harry says to Jack, like, Jack's like, "Oh, we got to take them out of the equation," and Harry says, like, "Oh no," he says, we got to do something about them," and he's like, "What are you going to do? Shoot them?" And then they cut to them on the roof, which is clearly several minutes later, and Jack replies, "No, we just take them out of the equation." And I'm like, is Harry like going, "What are you talking about? Were we just having a conversation?" "Oh, you mean the thing I said 10 minutes ago before we came up 20 flights of stairs and got to the roof of this building?" It's the classic thing Chris and I talk about where a lot of people talk about. This is a very common criticism where like a conversation is happening and then they change location and the next sentence follows on from the previous one, even though practically speaking several minutes must have passed.
Jess said, she said also on that similar thing. She said, of all the unrealistic things in this movie, one of the most unrealistic is the notion that they've run up 38 flights of stairs and don't even take a breath.
Yes. Yeah, I don't care how fit you are. You're gonna be like, oh, that sucked.
Yeah. To start the positivity train, because we've not really talked about well, all the acting in this film is great. I genuinely think that. But we've not really talked about the villain, so let's signpost Dennis Hopper, and talk about the villain in general. And I just think like the way he's able to switch from almost cartoonish to sinister to like clever plotting, like do you know what I mean? I think it's a masterful performance. Like clearly a man who has been beaten up by society and has gone a bit mad. But then also still, you really do, because there's moments where there's full on like cackling and like I say, like almost cartoonish villainly, but you then also have to believe that he's actually put together quite an intricate and clever thought through plot. I don't like the execution of it, but the hole in the floor so that he can grab the money, all that sort of stuff is clever. And yeah, I think a big part of it, why you get away with that, is Dennis Hopper's performance. But in general, I found the villain engaging, and I like that they linked the villain to the heroes with the whole cop side of things. So how do you think the villain was handled in this movie, Dan?
Yeah, I think brilliantly. I mean, it's one of the things that's so clever about this is the choice to make the villain not a stereotypical action villain. I mean, it is kind of expanding on what Die Hard did with Hans, because Hans Gruber isn't your traditional gun-toting villain. He's more of a thinking man's villain. He's a problem for the hero because he's quicker to use his brain than he is to pull his gun. But I think what this movie does is it foils that by giving this, John McClane is not a thinking man. He is a shoot first, figure it out later kind of guy, right? Whereas Jack is very clearly a thinker and a deep thinker, and they set that up really early in the movie, and they do the whole chewing gum jaw thing that he does whenever he's supposed to be problem solving, which is a deliberate character choice made by Keanu Reeves. So for me, I think not a lot of movies were brave enough to give you this kind of villain, the one that would absolutely and automatically lose in a fist fight to the hero. So that's a really great choice. Hopper really is a good casting choice for that. He comes across, you believe that in his heyday he was Action Man, and that he basically is the third evolution of, you go from Jack to Harry to what's his name? Howard Payne. That's your evolution. Once you go through the grinder, and you believe he's the third stage. You believe Harry could have become this guy. You believe there's a chance Jack could become this guy. And there's a lot of believability to that. And I think the movie's so good at balancing its tone when it comes to like action and serious stuff and also comedy. And I think a lot of that is we talked about it, but we didn't actually. I guess we mentioned it without actually passing any sort of review of it. Joss Whedon's dialogue, which is, I think, a huge part of what makes the movie work. And like I said, Graham Yost, the original writer, has said that most of the dialogue is Whedon's. And I think one of the things that's so great about this villain is he is funny when he needs to be funny. He is menacing when he needs to be menacing. And obviously a lot of that is the performance, but also I think a lot of it's in the writing. He's the amount of times he says clever or funny things, also helps him feel interesting, and he does sometimes suffer from the Joss Whedon problem of everyone having clever, witty things to say, which means that like it doesn't feel as impressive because everyone's doing it. I always feel like Joss needs to pick the characters he gives those kinds of lines to, but it's one of those things. So yeah, I really liked it, and I thought they handled him really well. I think the movie in general handles its comedy really well because it never ever detracts from the seriousness of the situation, even though, generally speaking, Joss Whedon's humor, you would argue, almost is deliberately designed to undercut tension. For whatever reason, it's part of the secret sauce here. It never actively has a net loss on the tension. It just ends up making the whole thing feel a bit more entertaining. And I think that's also a really good balancing act. He was reserved enough in his use of it to never actually undermine the seriousness of it. He always uses it in just the right place and in just the right way. And the jokes, when they do hit and when they are there, are very funny. The movie's funnier than I remembered by quite some way.
I think what also helps with that balance of tone is the music. I think the music choices in this movie, the score is brilliant.
It really is.
And the way the music informs how you should be feeling, and therefore adds to, you know, the tension, the action, the comedy, whatever the scene needs. Mm-hmm. The music in this film is spectacular. Like, it's done really, really well. Yeah. Like, look at the music cues as the you know, when they get into a real perilous situation, you know, the music cues at the end with the subway, you know, going off, and then the music cues after the, you know, almost the use of silence after the woman is thrown under the bus. You know, every music choice, be it this kind of bombastic orchestra, or be it these quieter moments, every music choice, every score choice is done really, really, really well. And I think, like I say, that helps with the tone, because the music really is telling you how to feel, and as a result, informing how you feel.
I 100% agree. And it's even got like a really iconic, like, it's crazy to me that the dun 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 isn't like more part of like like film music lexicon. Like, people can do the Terminator, the dun 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 dun. You know, it's like a very iconic, very famous piece of music from a very famous movie. It's crazy to me the score from this movie isn't like regularly cited as like a top piece of like film score, because just the main theme alone is so iconic. And the music's written by Mark Mancina, who does a great job here, and he's done a bunch of other great movies, and he's very, very talented. But this is magic. Like, I don't know, it upsets me a little bit that this isn't more recognized, I think.
But I think you could argue that about the whole film. I really do. I don't think it's rated highly enough as an action movie as well as it should be. Yeah. I think it's more people are like, oh yeah, Speed, I've seen that movie, I had fun with it. Like, no one talks about
Die Hard on a bus, you know.
Yeah, I think the Die Hard on a bus thing harmed it, and I think you know, no one talks about it with reverence, and it's weird, really, because like Air Force One, which was essentially Die Hard on a plane, I feel like Air Force One is talked about with way more reverence than this film is.
Yeah, which is funny, because I suspect, and we'll get to that at one point, I'm pretty sure, but I think this is the better movie. From memory, this is the better movie.
That would be my instinct, yeah.
But it's interesting as well. I wonder how much The Simpsons undercut this movie. For those who don't know, but I suspect most of you will know, The Simpsons has a famous segment where Homer sort of explains the plot of this movie in a way that, like, I don't know, kind of undercuts it in a way. And I think that for a lot of younger people who didn't see the movie but saw the Simpsons episode, it just made the movie seem kind of dumb, because he's explaining it, and it is very funny. And IMDb referenced this joke in the way they do. I'll tell you that in a second. But basically, the joke, for those of you who don't know, Homer is using the same trick with the cameras to make it look like he's still at work, where he's looping, you know, a minute of footage, but he's actually left work for the day. But he's explaining it to his colleagues, and he's like, I saw it in this movie, and there was a bus that had to hit this speed, and once it hit this speed, it couldn't go lower than that speed, or it would explode from not having enough speed. I think the movie was called The Bus That Couldn't Slow Down, which is a very good joke. It's a great joke, and I will say, IMDb, if you type The Bus That Couldn't Slow Down into IMDb, it takes you to the page for Speed. Which 10 points to IMDb for doing that. I think that's very clever. So, but like, you know, I feel like they kind of undercut the movie a little bit there. So for people who hadn't seen it but maybe saw that, because that's quite iconic, maybe there's an element of that harming it in a certain generation's eyes. I don't know. And I guess in principle, like in description, it does sound like a dumber movie than it is. I just think it's like, if you don't know what the movie is, you've never seen the movie, and someone explains it to you, like, what, that's a whole movie set on a bus? Are you kidding? Like, what do you mean? You know, obviously that's not the case.
Yeah, and the irritating thing about that is, one, as we've already discussed, the whole movie isn't set on the bus.
Correct.
But two, they do so much to like to add problems, like the turn, the gap in the road. Even though we don't love the execution of that one, well, or the idea behind it, but the gasoline, the actually going to the airport. Is a clever solution to the road issue of it all. People. I don't know if you necessarily need someone on the bus to have a gun. That feels maybe a bit overkill. But But it still creates a problem. The driver gets shot. Like they do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The movie is not, as it may sound, a bus just driving fast for 90 minutes.
Can I just say, I love the guy with the gun, by the way. It's such a great moment because it's like, of all of the problems, like that's one of my most favorite, one of my favorite moments of tension in the movie. It's like one of the best, like for me, because it's like, no one really understands they can't slow down yet, except for that he's briefly mentioned it to the driver. This guy with a gun, it's like, you are not the problem right now, and you're just desperate for everyone on the bus to understand, but there's just no time. And and then that guy thinks he's being the hero by taking the gun off him, but ends up creating the problem because then we don't have a driver on a bus that literally cannot stop. Like the tension that scene creates, I love it. It's one of my favorites in the whole movie. It's great. I think it's such a brilliant scene. So yeah, I think it's top stuff. I just think, like, from an action and tension perspective, it's a masterpiece. And a lot of it comes from the script and the ideas, but it works really, really well.
Do you? And I don't mean to, because this potentially could lead to criticisms if we're in the positive section of the movie, but do you think old Conroy? I can't remember his character's name in this. Alan Rudd. Do you think his character is written with consistency? Because I'm not sure it is.
Which character are we talking about?
The tourist. It's
Alan Ruck's character. Stevens.
Rucks, yeah. He plays Conroy in Succession. Do you think there's consistency within his character?
Yes and no, because I think he's doing I think at the beginning he's kind of in a shtick. He's like, I'm the tourist. Isn't that funny? Because he's trying to make friends and he's being awkward and weird. And I think the sort of more nervous version of him we get later is maybe the real him coming out, and that's kind of the idea. I think he's consistent enough that you get away with it. He's great in this movie, though.
He's brilliant. I'm not criticizing. It was more a question on the writing than his performance.
I mean, what do you think isn't consistent? I mean, he's like all like overly like confident and weird at the beginning of the movie, and then like once the actual action kicks in, he's like a panicky little child, which I thought was kind of the point. But maybe I've misunderstood.
Some of the stuff where he's a bit insensitive, like is it when someone when he's like, if he dies, we'll all definitely be on the news or something like that. Like,
they do a couple of those. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I just think like I think it feels like his character description when they were planning this movie and they were writing all the characters and what kind of people they were. I think they wrote Alan Ruck, annoying, jerk, coward. Which I think all of his actions in this movie hit one of those three, and I don't think they contradict each other.
I guess it's he's so scared and so scared. And again, this isn't about a performance. I think his performance is brilliant. I think the character's endearing because of his performance. Mm-hmm. But I guess he's so scared at the end that you're like. Is a person that scared and frightened in certain moments also going to be like, oh, the airport, I've already seen the airport? And again, it's a question, not I've firmly made up my mind that it is inconsistent.
I think so, because I think it's very deliberate. I think the idea is that he's like very much the kind of person that's putting on a front, and his insensitivity or cracking jokes when he shouldn't be or being annoying otherwise is all him coping with what he's feeling on the inside, which comes out in moments where we see the cowardice, where we see the fear, when the reality sets in. I think that's the intention. I'm not saying it's a particularly deep character, but I don't see any contradictions that aren't like just the normal inherent contradictions in a person who behaves one way but is maybe feeling a different way.
Yeah.
Like me when my social battery is at 0, but I'm out with other human beings and having to pretend.
Yeah. Or me when people think I enjoy doing these podcasts. sometimes.
I should say very quickly, because we are running out of time. We need to get to the trip soon, but I should say very quickly, just cast-wise, right? Like, the guys on the bus in general, right?
Oh, yeah.
All incredible. Like, some of the best acting in this movie is not happening at the front of the bus, in my opinion. I think some of the best acting in this movie is happening very much behind. Beth Grant, who I just love in everything. She's just one of the most underrated character actors working in any genre. Like, she's incredible in everything she's in. We've come across her multiple times in this podcast. She'll come back again. For those who don't know, she's the actress whose character tries to step off the bus. But I know her as "Sometimes I Doubt Your Commitment to Sparkle Motion" from Donnie Darko. But yeah, she's just an absolute legend of an actress. She's been in a million things, and she continues to be. Whenever I discover her in a, I'm not sure if she's still working today. She's probably in like her 70s now. But like, whenever I see her in anything, I'm happy that she's there, because she is such a reliable performer, and very rarely does she get lead roles, and it frustrates me because she's so talented. But that's true of everyone, sort of in the back of the bus. Even the guy who plays the driver, I'm going to look up his name. I'm not going to pretend I knew, but Hawthorne James is his name. Wonderful performance, very warm. You love him as the bus driver. You're sad he's shot. The guy who plays Ortiz, Carlos Carrasco, apologies. Also brilliant. He has a really good sort of like vibe throughout the whole movie. He's a very reliable character. Like he's always entertaining. Yeah, everyone on the bus is great. I really was very impressed.
I was going to say it's not just the back of the bus, man. Sandra Bullock is so unbelievably charming in this movie. Like it's a wonderful, wonderful performance.
It's almost like she has. It's almost like she has enough charm for two people, Chris.
What's he talking about? Because it's funny. Because I was thinking, obviously, you start thinking about the points that you want to make, and the sort of the touch paper for this point in my head was, do Keanu and Sandra have good chemistry? Maybe we should talk about their chemistry. Well, they do have a lot of chemistry, but it's partly because of the like insanely wonderful performance from Sandra Bullock, and the looks she gives him, and just how captivating she is in this movie. And then ultimately the point I made was to really compliment Sandra Bullock, which I think says a lot, because and that actually I think is the one thing that sort of it is the legacy of this film. It is known as her breakthrough performance.
Yes.
And you can absolutely see
so.
why casting directors, why the public, why, who is not falling in love with Sandra Bullock in this movie? It's a wonderful, wonderful performance.
She's incredible. And look, I like Keanu Reeves, but he is, I think, a spaceman. I love Keanu Reeves, but he is very, very very rarely a believable human being. And I say that with all the love in the world, because I think he's an amazing person, and he's been in so many entertaining movies, and he has entertained me in so many movies. But Google Keanu Reeves sneezing and watch the footage of him pretending to sneeze like a human being does in another movie he did. It's insane. Like he is not the best actor. He's just got a lot of gravitas, I think.
But he does the other thing well, though, doesn't he? Like, John Wick and Neo are two iconic performances, and they lean in on his strengths.
Yeah, his stoicism. Yeah, his stoicism is his strength, and it's an incredible skill he has. It makes it hard for him to play characters that need to be warm or show warmth, or so he's struggled, I think, when he's been in romantic roles in the past. And again, sorry, Mr. Reeves, I think you're brilliant. I really, really do. It's not your thing. It's not your thing. I'm so sorry. It's just not. And again, he's so iconic, and apparently he's like the nicest man in Hollywood as well. Him and like Tom Hanks. So no criticism of him at all. And he's been in, we've complimented him many times. He's amazing in Bill and Ted. John Wick is a masterpiece. Like, all the John Wick movies are amazing. So, not a criticism of him. I just think there's things he can do, things he can't do. And in this case, all of the charm and warm performances. The front of the bus is very much coming from one half of the duo. The other one is staring off into the distance, looking like he's thinking about how to save a busload of people, which is what the role requires. So it's okay. He gets away with it in this case. The only moments in this movie it doesn't quite work is when he's attempting to be quote unquote charming, which works a lot less in my opinion.
I also, in terms of actors, I will also say that every single time, Dan, I watch this movie, including this time, despite the fact that I've seen this movie a lot and can tell you the beats and can remember them, every single time I watch this movie, at the beginning of the movie, I go, oh yeah, Jeff Daniels is in this movie.
Yeah, me too.
What a treat.
Yeah, delightful.
It always slips my mind, and I'm always thrilled to see him.
Yeah, and he's always great. I love Jeff Daniels. Big fan of Jeff Daniels. Big Jeffy D. So I think, look, if we're doing overall thoughts, because we need to move this bus along, Chris, at the pace of the movie. I think this is an incredible movie that does a lot for creating tension and doing situational action. It's the kind of action that I really, really enjoy. Even if I don't understand how it works, I think all the performances are great. The music's great. It's got some weird nitpicks and some third act. I wouldn't even say third act problems, because third act problems suggest it has a real impact on the rest of the movie. I think actually the way I'm going to phrase it is it's got an uneven third act that doesn't fit in with the tightly written first two acts. It feels out of place when compared because it has more holes. It is a little rough around the edges. It is a little bit, it's almost like this was added later in the scripting stages, which it was. It feels like that, unfortunately. So, yeah, that's one of those things. Oh, we haven't. There's something we haven't talked about very quickly. Sorry, Harry's death. Harry dies. It's very sad. I was sad about that. His death is very impactful. Again, because of the thing Chris talked about at the beginning of the movie, which is that there aren't many. So when they happen, you feel them.
But also, it's linked to. I mean, it is word. What an incredible performance by Jeff Daniels in that moment specifically, because his face is telling you a lot of things, but he's conveying them all. His face is, oh fuck. His face is anger at being tricked. His face is fucking great. It comes down to this job that I've become a bit despondent with has cost me my life. Like, his face is saying all of those things and more. And it's like a 2-second shot of just his face, no dialogue. It's fucking phenomenal.
Yeah,
that I'll say it. It's a 2-second wordless moment. I think it's some of his best acting, and that's not me shitting on the rest of his acting. I genuinely believe it's just that scene and that moment is that good, and it links in a way to my headline thought, which is, I think this movie is really underrated. I think this movie is not appreciated the way it should be. I think, whilst there are third act issues and all the things we've talked about and tightening, it is just tightening. Some of it just needs a little bit of tightening. But actually, even in spite of that tightening, it is full of tension. The score is phenomenal. The acting is great. Sandra Bullock, alone, is a reason to watch this movie and get captivated by it. It's got a ton of really, really clever story decisions. It's visually great. It's got some great cinematography. Like you said, the shot, some of the decision making in this movie from both the script and the shot perspective, as you talked about earlier, when Annie and Jack shoot out of the bus and the decision to have them hit all those signs and stuff like that just makes that visual really interesting. And they do that with both plot tension and visuals all throughout the movie, and I think it is a much stronger movie than people give it credit for, and I think it's really underrated.
Yeah, I agree.
So, yeah.
And it's a real amalgamation of all those things coming together that makes it work so well. Like like the pram moment is a really good example of everything working. It's shot really well. It's full of tension. Sandra Bullock is just absolutely selling it. While Keanu Reeves looks just a bit amused by her acting in that moment. I feel like they should have done another take for Keanu's sake, but anyway, because that's his probably worst performance in the whole movie, because he's basically almost cracking a smile as if to say, Sandy, pull it down. Bring it back. She's right, by the way. It's perfect. It's pitched perfectly. Her character absolutely would have that empathy and panic that way. But it's shot in a way that you're like, oh my god, they hit the pram in the slow mo as the pram goes up into the air, and you think, Christ, that's a baby. We're killing a baby. It's just so well done. And that scene amalgamates all of those things coming together at once, where there's like tension and comedy and great performances and all the things that make this movie so deeply entertaining. And I think that is it, isn't it? It's that the movie is just so thoroughly entertaining. None of this academic stuff is even, is even that point purposeful. Like, you will just be entertained by this movie if you watch it, if you haven't already seen it. So you should. So there we go. Shall we hit the triv, Chris? Say the thing.
Yeah, let's triv it up.
I'm gonna give you some trivia. So I'll blast through this quick. There's a fair bit, but I'll see how quickly I can get through it. So Paramount first picked the script up in 1992, but did not proceed with it because, basically, the original script ended with everyone getting off the bus. That's where it ends. No subway stuff. And because of this, Paramount felt that the movie had too much bus in it, and they were worried audiences wouldn't watch a 2-hour movie purely set on a bus.
I don't. Given everything we've talked about how this film is underrated and maybe misconceived, I don't think that's the most illogical thing I've ever heard a studio say.
I 100% agree with you, Chris. So they eventually let the script, they let the option expire, which put the movie into turnaround, which allowed Yost to add the subway scenes. And modify the script to add those before they then presented it to 20th Century Fox, who eventually picked up the movie and agreed. So I think you're exactly right. I think you're 100% right. So once 20th Century Fox were on board, they reached out to a few different people to direct. Quentin Tarantino was apparently offered the chance to direct this movie. He turned it down, although he did later name it one of his 20 favourite films since the year 1992. Very specific. I'm assuming this is some sort of article or essay he wrote, but yeah, he ended up really liking the movie, so that's cool. They did turn briefly to Die Hard director John McTiernan to direct. He turned it down also, and eventually they kind of went to the conclusion that maybe it should be a film for a newcomer to direct, and then they came across John de Bont, who directed this movie ultimately. He had been in charge of the cinematography for Die Hard, and also The Hunt for Red October, which were two McTiernan movies. And they thought, what a natural successor to McTiernan than the guy that helped with the cinematography on two of McTiernan's arguably biggest movies, Hunt for Red October and Die Hard. McTiernan's an absolute machine, though. He made a lot of really great movies, so, arguably. I think Die Hard, less arguably, if I'm being honest, but that's just me. Anyway, that made a lot of sense. So yeah, John de Bont was then brought on board. So he obviously, we talked about, was driving around one day and saw the unfinished section of the I-105 freeway missing, and that's where he came up with that idea, and they added that to the script. Apparently, when it was originally written, back in the Paramount days, the writer had apparently written the movie with Jeff Bridges and Ellen DeGeneres in mind.
Jesus. Okay.
Look, it was the early 90s. Like, Keanu Reeves had not evolved into who he became yet, and obviously Sandra Bullock was kind of found for this movie. So these things take time. Sometimes we have to do the wrong choices before we get the right ones. But at that point in the script, Annie was a more comedic role. To contrast against the sort of more serious tone of Jack. Now, Ellen DeGeneres has denied being considered for the role in a 2015 Howard Stern interview. But obviously, that doesn't preclude that she was who it was written for, in my opinion. Just because the offer never came, doesn't mean that's not who was in mind when Graham Yost was writing the script. But also, in a 2019 interview with Keanu Reeves, she very much said, did you know that Speed was written with me in mind? And then she did a whole bit where she said, this is how it might have turned out. And she'd done a whole clip with green screen where she put herself into the movie and then the bus explodes. Ha ha ha. She wouldn't have been good in that movie. Which feels very self-deprecating, but also a little bit hollow in the wake of recent developments. So yeah, that didn't end up, who knows if she's joking or serious or whatever. So yeah, I don't think that would have worked. So I'm glad we got the casting we got. And obviously, it was the 90s, so they went through the entire list of leading men from the 90s before they settled on Keanu Reeves. I'll read it, but I'll read it as quick as I can. Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Willis, Kurt Russell, Van Damme, Harrison Ford, Mel Gibson, Tom Cruise, Patrick Swayze, Wesley Snipes, Kevin Costner, Dolph Lundgren, John Travolta, Val Kilmer, Dennis Quaid, Tom Hanks, Michael Douglas, Michael Keaton, Nicolas Cage, Johnny Depp, Jeff Bridges, and Christian Slater, all apparently considered at one point or another for Jack Taven. I assume in varying degrees of seriousness. Some of them probably actually did audition. Some of them maybe even just received offers. Whatever reason, none of them ended up doing it. I think we looked out on most of those. I don't think there's a name in that list I'd have preferred in the role. Was there anyone that stuck out to you in that very quick list?
No.
Yeah.
No.
It's the 90s. I think whenever we do a 90s action movie, maybe we just say it's that list when we talk about the potential people that could have played the lead. Because it's always,
I think that's fair.
It's always that exact list. The names we infinitely talk about in this podcast when we do movies of this nature from this era. Reeves was actually a bit reluctant to do this movie. Not Fred Flintstone reluctant, as we talked about a few weeks ago. Check our podcast
Obviously
on that. But he didn't love the original script he read. He thought it was too similar to Die Hard. I disagree with him, but that's fine. And he wasn't particularly interested in doing an action movie. But he finally signed on for two reasons. One, John de Bont brought in Joss Whedon to rewrite the script. So he knew there were changes coming to the script. But the deal was sweetened because John de Bont promised that Reeves would be allowed to do as many of his own stunts as possible, which he insisted would be fun. And thus was born Keanu Reeves' insistence on doing as many of his stunts as he can. And really, John Wick was born when that conversation happened, because little did we know that we were starting Keanu on a journey that would continue through his Matrix movies, and then where he did a lot of his own stunts right to the modern day, where we have the brilliant John Wick series. So hey, John de Bont's got a lot to answer for. But I think good things. That's good. I want to make it clear. I think that's good. By the way, I'm pronouncing it Jean de Bont in a way that sounds a bit like John de Bont, but it's Jan. I should clarify. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it wrong or right. But I'm sticking with what I've gone with. But just yeah. As we already talked about, Whedon ended up rewriting almost all the dialogue, but his rewrite is completely uncredited. At the time, Whedon was working as a script doctor, and he had sold a script a few years before that had never gotten made. But it was all of the executives in Hollywood loved that script. It never quite became a film, but they started handing scripts to him all the time. I think the more famous example of Joss Whedon working as a script doctor, where he was brought in to tighten up a script before it was filmed, which is a role he played in Hollywood for many years before Buffy happened. Toy Story. He worked on the first Toy Story movie, famously, added a bunch of jokes and stuff for that. So this will probably not be the last time we talk about Joss Whedon jumping into a movie last minute to tighten it up before it goes. In fact, oh no, I've just realised what we've done. That's next week. We're doing another one of those next week.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure that's coming up next week.
Yeah, I've just realised. Yeah, okay, my bad. Well, there you go. But yeah, throughout the sort of 90s and early thousands, that was a very common thing. A lot of movies Joss had a finger in. I mixed my metaphors there, because the finger in many pies metaphor, but it sounded weird. He threw his hat into the ring for a lot of these films. Hat into the ring, that's also not... I've mixed two metaphors there as well. Ignore me. Metaphors are not my thing right now. It's too early. How you feeling, Chris?
Yeah. I never want to hear the word metaphor again, but I'm good otherwise.
That's fair. The bus that couldn't slow down. The Dan that couldn't slow down. 20th Century Fox executives were a little concerned that Reeves didn't have enough star power on the film, and then insisted a big-name actress should be in the other role if they're going to cast Reeves. But Jean de Bont stuck to his... He stuck to his principles and outright refused, and eventually they just relented to the casting of Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves. But 2 weeks before filming was when they finally agreed to it.
Oh, wow.
Some alternate casting for our villain. There's only two other names that were considered before they landed on Dennis Hopper, and it is Jack Nicholson and Robert De Niro. I think both would have been very good, but I do think Dennis Hopper is the most former cop of them. He fits the role better, in my opinion.
I think you summed up Dennis Hopper best earlier when you said you believe he used to be Harry. You believe he used to be Jack.
Yeah.
You believe he used to be the action cop.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I would have... I don't know... And I'm not saying Jack Nicholson and Robert De Niro aren't brilliant actors that could have convinced me of that. But yeah, I just think it's so perfect. I wouldn't even risk hiring a different talented actor to try and achieve what Dennis Hopper achieves here. If we're talking about actors, by the way, unappreciated, Dennis Hopper, what a career. Man, that guy's amazing. Not talked about enough. He should be up there with your Nicholsons and your De Niro's. It's a shame that he's often not rated as highly. Anyway, Jean de Bont insisted...
Do you think he just never had that? Like, you Google Dennis Hopper, and the first three movies that come up are Easy Rider, Speed, and Waterworld.
Yeah, he never had his like iconic career defining. He didn't have his One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You know what I mean? He didn't. Yeah, that's true. He just got a bit unlucky. Yeah, that's a fair point.
Even his Wikipedia. Hopper made his first television appearance in 1954, and soon after appeared in two of the films that made James Dean famous. Like, even his Wikipedia is talking about the films he was in that made other people famous.
That's a really good point. Whereas I guess if you were to look up like, Robert De Niro, I guarantee you like Goodfellas, Taxi Driver, Heat, they're all coming up.
Apparently
first.
he did receive. He is an Academy Award winner for Best Supporting Actor for Hoosiers.
Good, he deserved it. He's great. I love Dennis Hopper. Is he sadly passed away now, or is he still around? I do lose track sometimes.
Yes, he sadly passed away in 2010.
That's a shame. Anyway, very missed. Love Dennis Hopper. He's going to come back at some point, because at some point we're going to sit through the dreadful 90s Mario movie in which Dennis Hopper plays an integral role. We'll come back to that. Anyway, Jean de Bont, insisted that Keanu Reeves get a sensible haircut that would fit a hard-working cop. 20th Century Fox executives were absolutely horrified when he turned up with a buzz cut. They actually went as far as to threaten postponing production so that he could grow his hair back, which would have had an absolutely massive impact on this movie, because that very section of road that the director saw that was not complete when he was first looking to do this movie was about to be completed but had not been opened yet. So they actually had a real stroke of luck here, where to do this movie they did not have to close an open road. They simply had to convince the city to delay opening the road several weeks so they could shoot on it. It wasn't open to start with. There was no disruption to anything. It was just then opened after Speed shot on it. And it's the exact same road he initially saw that gap on. Obviously, now completed. We'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, fantastic. I think that's a really cool bit of like the universe sorting this out. They nearly postponed production, which would have lost them the ability to use that road, and they would have had to have paid an absolute fortune to close normal roads, and it would have been much more restrictive, and the movie probably would have been a lot worse for it, in my opinion. But anyway, Keanu Reeves and Jeff Daniels both did a training system thing with SWAT personnel to perfect their sort of movements with the guns and all that stuff, which I think both move very convincingly with the large weapons. That makes sense. Apparently Sandra Bullock actually learned to drive a bus for the film, and she passed her bus driving test on the first attempt. So 10 points to Sandra Bullock. That's very impressive.
Yeah, fair play. I wonder, do you think that expires, or do you think she can still drive a bus?
I reckon it expires every so many years. Yeah, unfortunately, but because my dad had passed that when I was younger. My dad did bus driving for a little while when we were moving around a bit. One of the quick jobs he did, but he explained to me that one of the things they do, because a bus is so heavy, it's being able to brake when going at like a high speed on like a slippery surface. So they wet the tarmac, had him get up to a certain speed, and then he had to stop this, several ton bus or whatever very suddenly, and my dad, like, very proud of his driving skills, like, you know, considers himself to be a very good driver. Said it was one of the harder things that he's ever had to do in a vehicle. So, you know, I think depending on what country you do it in, they're different strictness. Maybe the American one isn't as strict. I don't know. But if it's anything like the one my dad did when we were in Ireland, like, it's very impressive that she just did that on the first try, in my opinion.
Yeah. I was gonna. This is a bit of a stay with me on this one, but I was going to make some sort of joke about, maybe that's why you've got an affinity with this film, because, you know, the connection to bus driving, and it made me remember a completely separate moment about a completely separate film, but it's a story always worth telling. May have told it on here before, but someone we went to uni with, I can't remember if you were in this story or not, Dan, but we got drunk one afternoon and got picked up by a taxi. It was Louis, so you can picture this. Dan.
Yeah, I can.
And we got in the taxi, and Louis turns to the taxi driver and just goes, "You ever seen Collateral?" And the taxi driver's like, "No." And Louis goes, "No. Taxi driver's the hero. You'd love it."
Louis was a character. I remember once I bumped into Louis doing his weekly shop, and it was a loaf of bread and a bottle of whiskey. It was amazing. I love Louis. Anyway, he was a fun character. Keanu Reeves breaking the glass on the door when he's banging on the bus at the beginning, that was a complete accident, but the director liked the effect and how it looked, so they left it in the final cut. I think that's cool. As he was promised, Keanu Reeves did approximately 90% of his own stunts. No word here on whether it did turn out to be fun, but, I mean, he's still doing it, so...
yeah, I assume so.
It was apparently Sandra Bullock's idea to get out of the situation by feigning a gum emergency and switching seats. I think that's delightful, and I think that's one of the things that makes the movie feel so charming and real, is that moment early in the film. So yeah, like that she came up with that. We've already talked about that. Okay, let's talk about, it's a special section called the fucking jump scene. Right, it's just a small section, but fuck me. So making the bus jump was a nightmare, basically. Buses don't tend to jump, even when they hit a ramp. They tend to just head first, because they're so heavy, and just immediately smash. So what they did to do the jump scene was they stripped the bus back and heavily modified it to allow it to reach a speed of 70 miles an hour. They equipped it with powerful shock absorbers to protect the driver. The driver's seat was then moved 15 feet backwards so that if something went wrong, he wouldn't be ejected out of the front of the bus. The seat... Go on, sorry.
Fucking hell. that was all that noise was.
Yeah. The seat itself was had a built-in suspension mechanism between the ceiling and the floor to prevent the driver from suffering spinal compression on impact. They then built a big ramp, positioned the camera sort of under it. The bus started from about 1 mile back and accelerated towards the ramp. By the time it hit the ramp, they estimated that it hit a speed of 61 miles an hour. They were aiming for 70, but it hit 61 miles an hour, which is still very impressive for a bus. Think about all the things they had to do to get the bus at 60 miles an hour, Chris. All of the stripped out seats, all of the things they did to lighten it so it could hit 60. And I'm expected to believe it spends the entire movie hitting 50. Anyway. Full of people. Fuck off. Anyway. I know, suspension of disbelief. So they were told by the people working on the stunt that knew what they were doing, the experts, that it would probably only go about 15 feet. So they set up the cameras accordingly. In practice, it went a bit further. Now, reports on this vary. I've heard from as little as double, so about 30 feet, to as much as 100 feet.
100 feet can't be real. Surely it would have like nearly hit the cameras or whatever.
Well, it did hit the cameras, Chris. That's the problem. So basically, it went so much further than it was planned that two things occur. Problem number one, right? It went higher than they expected, so the top of the bus is out of frame. But two, because it went so much further, it landed and destroyed one entire camera set further back. Now, a second camera set was also, but they had multiple cameras obviously set up to catch it from different angles because they were only going to do it the once. They did decide they wanted to do it again, though, because apparently, despite the destruction of the cameras and all of the other bits and bobs of this that went wrong, the landing itself was apparently too smooth that it didn't seem believable. So they went again.
I bet it seemed believable to the poor fucker that was in charge of the cameras that got destroyed.
Yeah. Or the fucking driver. Again? Did you not hear the part about how the bus is rigged so I don't get spinal compression or ejected from the front? So ironically, considering that in all of the efforts, it did land too smoothly. They did want to do it again. So Chandlerbot phoned Panavision and asked them to send any old cameras they had lying around, because obviously they were short of cameras after the first attempt. All they needed was to be able to do an anthropomorphic lens, and he promised that Panavision that they would be put further back this time, which is what happened. So they then did a second take, which they used bits from both, because I think in the cut we have now, when it goes up, the top of the bus does go out of frame. So I think they used that shot from the first take, and I think the landing is from the second take. Once they kind of knew where it was going to land, how it was going to land, what it would look like, they were able to sort of adjust it for that. And they got a much sort of less steady landing on the second time. So then they were like, yeah, that's the one. So yeah. There you go. Now, while we're on the subject of that's the end of the section about the jump. I just thought there was so much different trivia about that, and I amalgamated it into one sort of bit, but like there was a lot. So the shot of the bus entering LAX while a plane takes off behind it took more than 50 takes, because it was actually really difficult to time the two things, apparently, because they would never know when a plane was going to take off exactly. They had to sort of estimate. And as someone who's flown a fair bit recently, yeah, planes are very inconsistent in terms of when they decide they're going to take off. That when you're taxiing and you're just waiting for the planes in front to actually get off their arse, it can take a while. So yeah, that was tricky. So I hate to bring Ellen DeGeneres back up, but we sadly have to, because it was across two different interviews with Ellen DeGeneres, with Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves, that we discovered that they both secretly had crushes on each other that they never acted on during the filming of this movie. So Sandra Bullock was talking about how handsome he was when she was on Speed, and that she actually kind of had a crush on him, but he didn't seem to kind of like... He wasn't so interested, in her opinion. And then about a year later, Keanu Reeves went on Ellen DeGeneres. She played the clip to him, and he's like, well, that's very funny, because I guess she really didn't know then that obviously I had a crush on her. She's adorable. And it turns out, I don't know if you use those exact words, but like, that's basically what he says. And it turned out they both kind of had a thing for each other, never acted on it. I think that is very fun, and also explains some of the chemistry, because I do think they've got a lot of chemistry, even with my comments about his performance aside. So I think that makes a lot of sense of that. If I'm being honest,
they got so much chemistry down that the people in the city around the debris of the subway train are smiling and clapping as if they fucking know these two people.
So weird, so fucking weird. We didn't talk about it, but it's one of my least favorite parts of the movie. Yeah.
I loved it.
Sure.
Just people that are fans of love, whether they've nearly been hit by a fucking speeding subway train or not.
Yeah. So the movie ran out of money before they finished shooting any of the subway stuff. The final sequence of the movie. There was some, not concern, but some thinking maybe we could just end it with them getting off the bus. Is there a way we could just shoot some small scenes to sort of wrap up that the criminal got, arrested as he tried to escape, and the movie just ends with the victory of them getting off the bus and kissing, like kissing when they were, when they come off the bus sliding on the thing. Did they just kiss there and the movie ends? But when they previewed it for an audience, they decided to test the subway scenes, and they instead completed the movie with the script as it was written, but using storyboards to do the last section of the movie. Apparently, the audiences still really reacted positively to even the subway stuff, so the studio decided to pull the funds together to shoot the scenes properly.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that worked out reasonably well. Some of the third act stuff we talked about aside. Apparently the house that they blow up is a real house, and they had to pay the owners of that house $5,000 to blow it up, and then they paid to have it completely rebuilt and repaired after doing so. So they got $5,000 of payment, and then all of the repair costs covered by the studio. They blew up a real house. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. The airport, naturally, would not allow any explosions to take place during the filming at the airport to avoid frightening potential travellers, because how do you explain to everyone, oh, don't mind the explosions, it's for a film? There'd be a lot of panic and a lot of nervous people on planes. So all of the explosions that occur anywhere near or around the airport were actually shot on a location in the Mojave Desert, not too far from where they were shooting. Yeah, just makes sense. A funny thing, the film was released 1 week before O.J. Simpson led the Los Angeles police on a chase in a white Bronco after he was suspected of murder. Two things on that point. First of all, Keanu Reeves' character in this movie drives a Ford Bronco. But after the iconic O.J. Simpson Bronco chase, many audiences who'd seen the film in theaters noticed how closely the film scenes resembled the real-life chase, including how the media covered it with aerial shots of the Los Angeles freeways. So, yeah, a lot of people thought that was a very funny little bit of like two real-life thing and a movie thing lining up. Oh yeah, so the film was originally going to be released in August 1994, but Fox had concerns it would underperform at the box office. However, a producer realized they might have a hit movie on their hands when they noticed that during test screenings, audience members would walk backwards whenever they needed to go to the bathroom to miss as little of the movie as possible. I love that. I just really like that. And as a result of these positive test screenings, Fox decided instead to use it as counter-programming for a film we're familiar with, Chris, 1994's The Flintstones, which opened 2 weeks earlier, because they thought anyone who didn't want to go see the family-friendly movie might want to go see a sort of more adult action piece. It was like a counter-programming thing.
That's got to be like, and don't feel the need to check this now, but that's got to be the closest two films have ever been. I had no idea they were that close in release. That's got to be the most aligned proximity is in terms of us reviewing something and them releasing. Do you see what I mean?
What I think's funny about that is that they released 2 weeks apart and we reviewed them 2 weeks apart.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, maybe
That's
3.
What I mean. That's crazy.
But it's hard to. So I will say, with a certain amount of. I suspect we've done over 100 movies now, a lot of them from this era. It wouldn't surprise me if I did the math and there was another one with a similar sort of release proximity, but it is pretty incredible, particularly because we've reviewed them so close together. I mean, I think it's 3 weeks since we reviewed Flintstones, thinking about it, but still very, very impressive. So yeah, that's what they ended up choosing to do, and Fox did indeed make the right decision because, Chris, let's play my favourite game. We'll do budget and profit. It was made for, well, there's a bit of a debate. It's either 27 million or 30 million was the budget for this movie, which I think is pretty. I think that's a pretty good tight budget, no matter how you slice it, in my opinion. But it made $350 million at the box office worldwide. So that made 10 times its money back. 30 million turns into 350 million. That's very impressive. The movie was so popular that the watch that Jack wears, a Casio G-Shock DW5600C, watches exist, which had been discontinued by the time... It had been discontinued by the time they started filming. It had to go back into production because of demand following this movie. I didn't really notice his watch, but there you go. Right, so I hope you're used to making noises, Chris, because we have like 3 different or 4 different exist segments lined up here. I'll try and make them as quick as possible, but I'm excited to hear Chris's noises, please. We'll start with the obvious one. It's Cars Exist, everyone. So, in this, as we already mentioned, Keanu Reeves drives a 1970 Ford Bronco. The car that he hijacks to chase down the bus, the sort of top-down convertible car, that's a 1988 Jaguar XJS XJ27, as we both knew. And now, Chris, it's time for Buses Exist. Okay, very good. The fictional Santa Monica Intercity bus line is a model GM TGH 5303, which is a second-generation GM New Look bus. So yeah, there you go. And it does have it has an identical paint scheme to the actual buses that serve the Santa Monica bus line area. There's a whole bunch of stuff here about it's one route and it does the I-10 and all this stuff. I'm not going to go into that. But the bus, the passengers are transferred to, the one that's they jump onto at the airport, is an Austrian-built 1982 MAN of Graf and Stiff model GSF H240 airport shuttle. So they modified it to give it certain things, but yeah, that was pretty cool. Big old bus. It's time, Chris, for Choppers Exist. Very good. And by the way, for those who don't know what we're doing here, for some reason the trivia always mention the model numbers of different things. For no reason at all. So we just do them as Cars Exist or Choppers Exist or whatever, because it's always funny to me that they do it. And particularly this movie had loads of them, so I just thought it'd be funny to do them all.
I think at its origins, the car thing was interesting. It has gone to an area that is only entertaining us, but still, just in case there might be an avid Chopper fan listening to this, and just in case, for you, baby.
Well, that person is going to really enjoy the fact the police helicopter is the MD520N, which is a helicopter with no conventional tail rotor, Chris. Instead, there's an internal blower which directs air out of a variable opening port at the rear left of the tail boom. And the exhaust port pressure is also directed to the left to assist with anti-torque function. This arrangement makes the aircraft safer to fly near trees and in other tight spaces, hence its use in this movie.
Well, hot damn.
Mm-hmm. And in addition to the MD520N helicopter, 2 Bell 206 jet rangers are seen briefly as helicopters for the news in the movie. It's time, Chris, for Mobile Phones Exist.
Ring, 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 ring.
The cell phone used by Dennis Hopper's character Howard Payne is a Pioneer PCH 600, which was manufactured by Motorola in 1992.
There you go.
We're not done. It's time for Guns Exist, Chris. Jack Tavern and Harry Temple keep M1911A1 pistols with Surefire 301R and 610R flashlights as their sidearms, even though, unfortunately, that's not accurate, because at the time the LA standard issue sidearm for patrol officers was a 9mm caliber, although the SWAT did have 45mm M1911 models as their sidearms. Ray, he has a Nickel & Wesson model 36. That's the gun that the guy on the bus has when he points it at Jack at the beginning of the movie. It has patch Mayer grips. There you go. And it's time for our final one, Chris. Birds Exist. Yeah, I'm kidding. There are no birds exist. I just really want to see what you do.
Okay. Did we not have trains exist? Because I had a good one for trains exist.
Oh, okay. I don't have one, but let's see if I can find out what train is used in the movie. It's time for Trains Exist, everyone.
Bing bong bing. The 2008 to Bournemouth has been delayed by 10 minutes.
Oh, that's giving me flashbacks.
Well, I did it very deliberately. There's a deep cut for deep cut nothing but static fans. That was a reference. That was a reference to 2008 being 2008 and Bournemouth being the year and location in which Dan and I met.
There you go.
A little Easter egg for the diehards.
I just typed trains exist into Google, expecting it to give me information about trains in the movie Speed. I've now Googled trains, Speed, film. Maybe there's an Internet Movie train database.
But that's going to bring up like speeds of trains in film. I think you need to Google like Speed 1994.
Yeah, you're right.
Name of train or something.
You're right. You're absolutely right, Chris. Oh no, it did bring it up. It just took me to the.
Okay.
Well, no, it just took me to the Wikipedia page for the film Speed, and also an IMDb page for a film called Speed Train.
We might not be able to find it. I don't know.
Is there a train in the movie Speed? It's a subway train. I do know that the subway train in Speed, the cart that comes out at the end onto the street is not a subway car. It's a bus dressed as a subway car because that's the only way they could get it onto the street. I do know that.
Yeah, I'm seeing that here as well. Yeah, it looks like it's a miniature of it. It was a miniature of an LA metro train.
There you go. Beautiful. So that's everything. I mean, look, it's a great movie. You should see it if you haven't already, although we've probably spoiled a lot of it for you now, but I still recommend people watch it. If you're interested, we'll do it officially, I guess. It's Chris's choice, but I think we've made it very clear where we're going next week. Do you want to dance around that, or do you want to just tell us where we're going, Chris?
I'll tell you right now, Dan. We are going to X-Men.
Yeah.
And we will then be
2000,
doing X2 or X-Men 2, which I'm looking forward to finding, because obviously that's pretty inconsistent how that film's referred to. So I'm looking forward to that podcast just to hear more about the confusion around the film's name.
Yeah, is it called X-Men 2? Is it called X2? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then X-Men, we're also doing The Last Stand, which I'm looking forward to because I've never seen. So yeah.
My memory is that it was a disappointing mess, but let's find out. Let's find out together. I am looking forward to doing the original X-Men trilogy. If you want to hear that now, dear listener, if you're listening to this on Spotify or iTunes, you're living in the past, man. What are you doing? Head over to patreon.com/nothingbutstatic, where you can get access to episodes of this podcast 1 week ahead of their normal public release. So you'd be able to... hear that right now. Patreon.com/nothingbutstatic, or of course you can just support us in lots of other ways. If you don't want to do so financially, very understandable. Just continue listening, or you can like and subscribe on whatever platform you find us on. We're on YouTube, youtube.com/nothingbutstatic UK. There's a few places you can get us. So all of that is available. Also, when you get on the Patreon, you get access to our Discord, where you can interact with us, or if you have any thoughts or comments on this, you can either leave them on the YouTube video that's relevant to this podcast, or you can head over to is it mail@nothingbutstatic.co.uk is where you can email us your thoughts. That I think is everything. So I know we're on a timer this week, so I knew Chris needed to leave quickly, but what I didn't expect was when I started wrapping it up for Chris to just start furiously zipping up things and collecting his items because he's clearly about to run out the door. Made it really I'm not gonna lie, it did make it a little difficult to wrap up because all I could hear was
apologies if people get it. I was actually Dan. I was actually doing you a favour because I know this year you're keen to edit as soon as possible. Yeah. So what I was actually getting out was my adapter so that I could upload the file. So fuck you.
Joke's on me. Chris is trying to be nice.
I'm not actually. Again, I think there's the time difference confusing thing. We have finished in good time for me. I don't forget it's an hour behind for me, so it's only 8:30 for me. So we're fine.
Oh, because there was a point. I'm not going to lie, listeners. There was a point, right, when I was trying to wrap us up, and I'd said 3 times, we'll get to the truth after this point, and then Chris kept extending it, and there was a point you were telling, like, there was an anecdote, like, it was the point where you talked about Louis, and I'm thinking, he knows he has to get out of here soon, right?
Yeah, and it was sort of, there was one point, because, also, I think actually sometimes, like, I experienced it the other day where someone brought up Home Alone, and I was like, tell you what, 10 hours ago, we released a review of Home Alone, if you want to listen to that. And the person was like, how long is it? And I was like, 2.5 hours. And they were like, it's too long. No, I'm not doing it. That's longer
the thing
than the
is,
movie.
the review isn't 2.5 hours. That's the problem with that one. The review is about an hour and a half. There's just a huge amount of trivia on that one. About an hour and 40 minutes of review, and then just a lot of trivia.
And there was a point where, because what I'm saying is, I don't think we have not shortchanged anyone. We said everything we wanted to say about this film concisely. There were, small anecdotes. I think it's been a good balance. I don't think the podcast has been affected. But there was a point, maybe it was when you were like, right, let's go. And in my head, I was thinking, he's got the time difference wrong again. And he thinks it's later for me than it is. But there's symmetry in that, Dan. I'm glad we started and ended this podcast
with me being confused about what time it is for you.
Yeah, exactly.
This
is handy. Don't get me. Look, the reality is, as you very well know, Dan, if I say to you, I need to be done by 9:45, the reality is I actually need to be done way before that. Like that is cutting it too fine, realistically, for getting ready and getting out the door.
And to be fair, we're only 15 minutes away from that point.
So. Yeah, exactly. So I do appreciate that, and like I say, I don't feel we've shortchanged anyone. But yeah, there was a definite point during Triv where I was like, I think he's confused again. But no, I was getting out my adapter so I could give you the file. Is what I was doing.
Wait, I've just done it again, haven't I? Have I just done it again? I just said we're 15 minutes away from that point, but we're not, are we? Are we an hour and 15 minutes away from that point?
No. It's 8:30 for me. So
okay.
Yeah, I said 9:45, 9ish. But like I say, as you know, I'm usually, if I'm like, oh, this is my hard out. Actually, realistically, for most people, they would say half an hour earlier. But I'm just trying to be generous on you getting up or whatever, or
That's
me
fair.
getting up or whatever.
That's
anyway.
Fair. Well, I'll tell you what, let's. It's still. I still think 2 hours is a good run time for this podcast. I think the times when we've gone to 2.5 have probably been, unless there's really detailed deeply unneeded.
Yeah, I know we've done it slightly because of having an out. I think this is this is what this podcast should be every week.
Yeah, an hour and 45 to an hour and 50 odd. For sure. Anyway, that's everything for this week, everyone. I'm going to hand over to Chris, who ends this, because if we keep joking about how long the podcast is, it will become a 2.5 hour podcast, and we really can't afford that this week. So, Chris, take it home.
My name's Chris Billingham.
My name's Dan Deering.
And this review has been rewound.